Welcome back to Grade 7 History, Unit Number 2, Conflicts and Challenges in Canada, 1800 to 1850. This is Lesson Number 19, How did settlements in the Canadas change after the War of 1812? Before we begin today's lesson, let's consider the following. What plans do you think the British government had for soldiers after the War of 1812? How would these plans affect settlements in Upper and Lower Canada? So, before we go any further, put the video on pause so that you can jot down your response to these two questions. All right, and let's proceed. Decisions and developments made following the War of 1812 affected the settlements and the lives of the people living in the Canadas. The British government wanted to prevent any future conflicts with the Americans, and they wanted to protect their colonies from future American attacks. To do this, they built new forts and improved existing forts in Upper Canada. Fort Henry, which had been built during the War of 1812, underwent a series of upgrades in 1832 to protect the town of Kingston, which was valued for its position as the entrance to the St. Lawrence River from Lake Ontario. And this photo shows a sunset ceremony at Fort Henry. Why do you think the fort holds ceremonies celebrating British soldiers of the past? It's a question for you to consider, so please put the video on pause and jot down your ideas on why Fort Henry still holds ceremonies celebrating British soldiers of the past. All right, let's move on. Also in 1832, the Rideau Canal was opened. The canal linked Kingston to Bytown, now Ottawa. As a result, Kingston became a military, economic, transportation, and political center. The Rideau Canal was a major point of defense, a secure shipping route, and a transportation route for immigrants who are moving from Lower Canada to Upper Canada. I'll just direct your attention to this illustration on the left. Lieutenant Colonel By, wearing the top hat, was responsible for overseeing the construction of the Rideau Canal. The artist placed him in the foreground of the painting to show just how important he was. The British government wanted former soldiers or veterans from the War of 1812 and the Napoleonic Wars to settle in the colonies. Former soldiers were granted land in Upper and Lower Canada based on their rank and years of service. They were also given transportation to Canada, food, and supplies. The soldiers had to clear the land and cultivate a certain amount of land within a given time period. If they missed the deadline, they would lose their land. Even with the free land, many soldiers had a hard time starting a new life in the Canadas. The soil quality was poor, and the lots of land were spread far apart in order to protect as much land from possible American attacks as possible. Roads were poor or non-existent, meaning that many soldiers and their families were isolated. Many soldiers simply left the land they were given and moved to towns and cities in search of work. And this photograph, which has clearly been colorized and cleaned up, shows a group of War of 1812 veterans who were reunited at a memorial in 1861. Many black veterans of the War of 1812 were also given land grants in the Canadas. However, they faced discrimination in seeking the land that was given to them. Black veterans were given only 100 acres each, which was half of what other veterans received. Despite this, black veterans used the land they did receive to create some of the first black settlements in the Canadas, such as Oro Township. Oro Township was the only government-sponsored black settlement in Upper Canada at the time. The black population started to decline in the 1830s as white settlers started moving into the community. The black settlers sold their land for high value and moved to find work on farms or in other towns. Today, however, some of the descendants of the first black settlers still live in Oro Township. Just look at this picture on the left. The Oro African Methodist Episcopal Church, built in 1849, is now a National Historic Site. After fighting for the British in both the American Revolution and the War of 1812, Richard Pierpoint decided he wanted to return to his hometown of Senegal, Africa. In his request to the Lieutenant Governor of Upper Canada, the now 71-year-old Pierpoint stated that he was too old to perform the labor needed to clear and cultivate the land he was granted. Unfortunately for Pierpoint, his request was denied, and he settled in 1826. He became a leader in his community by helping people escape slavery in the U.S. And this poster, Richard Pierpoint, is one of a series of posters created by Historica Canada, which also created the Heritage Moments commercials. What does this poster tell people about Pierpoint's life and role in Canadian history? So after I'm done talking, please put the video on pause so you can take note of the fact that we actually have 3 images of Mr. Pierpoint. 2 images being in the background. So just take the time to consider how his dress is different in each of the 3 poses, and jot down your ideas on how this poster tells us that he was important in Canada's history. All right, and finally, so we're at the wrap-up point of this video. 2 questions for you to consider and for us to discuss in tomorrow's class. Number 1, do you feel life for black people in the Canadas improved, worsened, or stayed the same following the War of 1812? And point number 2, what artifacts from the early 1800s could we use to understand more about the challenges that soldiers and settlers faced after the War of 1812? So what you're going to do is put the video on pause, write down your responses to these 2 questions. If you don't feel confident and writing responses to one or both of these questions, means you need to go back, watch this video at least 2 more times, and when you're ready, put the video on pause. All right, and I look forward to a lively discussion of these 2 questions as well as the other questions that popped up earlier in this video. But until our next class, this concludes today's video.